Hello and welcome. Now this is exciting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there are some strong clues in this trailer that, at least to me, reveal some hints about the plot, both past and present, and what remains to come that I'm going to jump into in just a second. As a huge fan and somebody who relished every aspect of Alien Isolation, particularly the horrifyingly tangible atmosphere and exciting survival gameplay, I'm very adamant that the sequel is going to live up to the hype, which is something that cannot be said about the franchise's recent film and TV installment, sadly. Let's be honest, this will be one of the most anticipated games and additions to the franchise of the decade, hopefully arriving in 2028 or 29 at the latest. Isolation can only be described as a perfect horror survival experience, famously scored a head-scratching 5.9 out of 10 by the wonderfully sincere people at IGN, remember? Firstly, given the success of the original in terms of the plot and the seamless introduction of Amanda Ripley, Ellen Ripley's daughter, it always seemed logical for them to continue with her story. Amanda's quest for truth regarding her mother's disappearance, which occurred when she was just 10 years old, regardless of the promise made by Ellen that she would be home for her 11th birthday, became a powerful emotional anchor.
Her 11th birthday?
It was never just another Alien game with forgettable characters and a series of mechanisms in place designed to ensnare and distract you with continuous action and nostalgia. Although, as a side note, Dark Descent was a phenomenal addition to the franchise as well. Isolation provided us with an extremely well-written and thought-provoking narrative that directly tied it to important events such as the Nostromo, the derelict, and Weyland-Yutani's involvement in the loss of life aboard the Nostromo in 2122. Isolation also attracted many who had never watched the films but loved the game's outstanding immersion and thrills. However, for Alien fans, it provided many more layers of clarity, lore, and subtext, perfectly positioned within a 57-year span in which we see Ripley emerge on both sides of that timeline. They achieved all this through the first ever telling of Amanda's story as she navigates many dangers, most prominently the clash against her own ruthlessly amoral company, as well as her very own xenomorph to contend with. Also, lest we not forget those who fell to the working Joes. Every clue Amanda uncovers, every recording she listens to, and every lead she follows is part of a search whose tragedy is already familiar to us. It makes her important because she is someone who spent most of her life living in the shadow of a mystery that fans already know the answer to. Because of this and much more, there is an irresistible lure to Amanda's story that thankfully will continue now. Oh, and just a warning that I will be talking spoilers if you haven't played the first Isolation yet. So before I get too deep into theories and so forth, why don't we just analyse as we go so we can get to the good stuff. Within this hauntingly rich series of shots of what appears to be a world already abundant with a well-established ecosystem and some life-sustaining properties, albeit a harsh environment with no breathable air for humans, there is clear evidence of an emergency landing or crash. The landscapes and detailed terrain, although exciting to see, feel just as ominous and threatening as the claustrophobic confines of Sevastopol Station. And for a game that forces you to hide as often as possible, these open spaces offer me no comfort at all. I'm extremely eager to see how the Xenomorph adapts to its new and more natural environment, and what new behaviours it will demonstrate. The looming backdrop gently reminds me of the landscape of Fiorina 161, or Fury 161 referred to by the inmates from Alien 3. An old ore processing facility turned prison colony where Ripley's fate would be sealed. Well, sort of. The visualism in Alien 3 was terrific, because the entire leadworks was pretty much a long-dead machine, almost like the remains of a dead civilization. With its endless corridors and chimneys, it dwarfed the inhabitants condemned to this purgatory, who occupied only a small part of a much larger industrial complex, and resigned to a life of abandonment. These inmates had formed an apocalyptic religious community in the hope of finding solace and purpose. We can clearly see a large communications tower, as well as ventilation and exhaust chimneys to the right that are very reminiscent of structures seen in Alien 3. This could simply imply that the company had located an Earth-like planet, perhaps rich in resources and requiring minimal or no interest in terraforming, especially since there is no atmospheric reactor in sight. Either way, what a fantastic backdrop. There is a mature vibe to this trailer that feels very dark, and even though this is clearly a very different look, it feels incredibly alien at the same time. From the iconic text transition to the familiar, foreboding sensations of a horrific repeat of past events, this is where the trailer gets very interesting and clues begin to surface. Keep in mind, this rather large piece of debris or ejected module that has laid waste to the immediate vicinity upon its fall from the heavens. Now consider what is said in Japanese by some type of authoritative figure.
やってくれたわね。大きな損失よ。
I'd have to assume that the lady who says, "Your mistake, it was expensive," is someone in a leadership role on the Yutani side of operations. We could speculate based on the expanded universe that she might be Jenny Yutani, a notable member of the Yutani corporate family tree. But I believe this was before the year 2137 and the events of isolation. There is also Naoko Yutani, who appeared in Alien Blackout, the mobile game. Naoko was an executive director and a second cousin of Miss Yutani, and sat on the junior branch of the Yutani family line, not the ruling head. Again, this is all speculation and isn't too important for now. What is intriguing is the eerie similarities between this module's internal design and the layout of the San Cristobal Medical Facility section aboard the now destroyed Sevastopol station, where the initial xenomorph was temporarily sealed in the previous game. Some of the similarities are uncanny, but I doubt this is the same construction because that section was tied into the larger tower structure, rather than being an independent ship module that could detach. However, near the end of the first game, a sealed, self-contained laboratory called the Gemini Exoplanet Solutions module was jettisoned from Sevastopol with a xenomorph still inside, while Amanda managed to escape by ejecting herself into space. While players of Isolation will know that the entirety of Sevastopol was consumed by the gas giant KG-348, the cliffhanger ending was that Amanda was immediately discovered floating in space by a mysterious ship. Therefore, how likely is it that this jettisoned module containing a xenomorph was also intercepted before full descent? Well, I like to believe the galaxy isn't conveniently teeming with these perfect organisms, and for whatever reason for the crash here on what has now been named Kurosaki Station, this could easily be the very same module. So, if the company rarely forgives such an expensive mistake, what was the mistake? It may not be that the Japanese lady is referring specifically to events in Sevastopol, but rather to Amanda's employment at Wayland Yutani and her overall deception as she prioritized seeking the truth about her mother over following company protocols. Or, if my theory is correct about the salvaged module by a company ship that may have been monitoring the downfall of Sevastopol Station from a close range all along. Will the sequel contain a prologue in which we see Amanda further jeopardize the company's plans to obtain a specimen, which in turn causes an emergency landing on this unsuspecting colony? The details about Kurosaki Station are partially taken from the speech given by the creative and art director of Alien Isolation 2 after the trailer was shown at the Summer Game Festival. It is a Wayland Yutani colony outpost built on a remote, storm-ravaged planet for resource extraction, and likely also a corporate frontier colony node. What is key here is that the art director said that the colony was unsuspecting of the arrival of this module and its contents, possibly meaning that Amanda has, for reasons unknown, now put an entire corporate colony at major risk from this deadly organism, perhaps making more sense of the crucial narration in the trailer. Another theory that seeks to extract meaning from these words is that Amanda has potentially been compromised in some way. It's impossible to know what happened to her after she was taken and for how long, but when Amanda meekly replies, "Yes, I understand,"
I understand.
she doesn't sound like she has that fight in her anymore. I don't believe for one second that we will play as the villain in Amanda's next chapter, but I get the impression things are about to get very grey and very complicated going forward. Whatever Weyland-Yutani are forcing her to do, and whatever their methods are, could be a sinister insight into a ruthless and exploitative company that has, at best, been merely an undertone of the films and games thus far. I can see her journey becoming increasingly more nuanced under the stranglehold of a powerful corporation that will likely force her to make some tough decisions at Kurosaki Station, with many innocent lives at stake. However, I suspect some form of redemption for Amanda, but I'm curious to find out if there will be any major connections to 1986's Aliens in any way. In terms of gameplay, what's also implied here is that the outdoor traversal is going to be very dangerous and unpredictable, due to violent global-scale storms and the sobering fact that the alien is no longer confined to corridors alone. Therefore, I'm really expecting the interactions with enemy AI to be vastly more complex than before. These are additional images of well-known locations aboard Sevastopol Station, which add to the confusion about which are flashbacks and how much of it may have survived and now resides on Kurosaki Station. In the teaser trailer, we certainly saw the opening of exterior doors of some form of jettisoned module from a much larger ship. We don't see enough of the exterior to know if they are going with the James Cameron's artistic vision, or staying with Ridley's retrofuturism approach for the complex, which they have clearly aced thus far, but a strong clue that separates the architecture is the fact that the doorway is not level with the ground and appears to be at an angle, implying that at least this structure may have just landed or been placed here, pretty much whack bang in the middle of town. Not to mention the scattered furniture and leaks likely caused by impact or pressure. Another spectacular and foreboding shot here that initially misleads us into thinking of the APC used by the colonial marines, but then on closer inspection appears more utilitarian, like the transporter used by the Jordans in Aliens, who rediscovered the ancient derelict. Then we see what feels like solid confirmation to me that we are looking at the same reinforced emergency detachment that was ejected from Sevastopol, but now completely gutted and stripped bare, with the strongest evidence of its origin being the monitors that still read "Proceed to evac." In fact, many of these brief clips show places that remind me of crucial moments and mission objectives in the first isolation on board Sevastopol. The trailer closes with imagery and very brief gameplay animations that bring us right back to the familiar and a burning desire to jump into the next chapter. The exposed ventilation shaft where we can actually see the silhouette of the xenomorph, which means alien shape by definition, is both a place of refuge and death if you recall. In fact, many times it was more or less a toss of a coin to step inside these claustrophobic shafts because wherever you could fit, so too could the alien. A still functional but heavily damaged working Joe is yet more proof that something was definitely salvaged from Sevastopol Station. Finally, we finish with a close-up of Amanda's green eyes and the inescapable jaws of the galaxy's most feared biomechanical being. Apart from my eagerness to find out where they will go with Amanda's story and to learn more about company secrets, I think Isolation 2 will expand core elements that made the first game so brilliant. Take the now iconic save station, for instance, which is perhaps one of the clearest examples of how a game turns mechanics into atmosphere, tension, and emotional memory. For a simple utility feature allowing us to save our progress, just having to physically reach them, expose yourself while often having to quickly hide, was uncomfortable to say the least. Then began the intense anxiety of attracting the alien with the machine's own noise, before your save would register. Ironically, the scariest part of the teaser is this lifeless contraption, which has almost become a symbol for what the game teaches us very early on. Any safe space is never really safe. Therefore, I can only imagine how the big open spaces of the exterior colony zones will dramatically increase this tension, and in doing so, add a whole new set of problems. Another big ask for the sequel is that they do improve the already innovative AI for the alien, which was a real leap forward back in 2014. The way it adapted to your actions and the environment over time and through repetition was magnificent. I can only hope that, in environments beyond the confines of a spaceship, we can encounter new obstacles and an evolved form of horror that surpasses what fans of the first game so loved. If I may go off on a tangent, and it's pretty obvious that Amanda is the playable character once more, I wonder if there will be certain reveals that connect to a theory I find myself subscribing to more and more these days. I'm referring to the idea that Carter Burke may have given Ripley false information about her daughter to get what he wanted, within a very limited time frame. The details about her seemingly idyllic life on Earth were just as vague as the heavily pixelated photo print he handed to Ripley within the Tranquil Wellbeing Center on Gateway Station in 2179. In fact, he rather smothered her whilst she recovered on the station and perhaps didn't allow Ripley time to investigate the truth, before she was coerced by the offer to reinstate her commercial flight status and flight license if she accompanied the Marines to LV-426, which she did. Perhaps Ripley was not told the complete truth about Amanda, as her daughter's actions may have caused trouble for the company long ago, that went far beyond the scope of the first game and certainly will extend into this sequel. At least that is my big wish going forward. That would be some fantastic connective tissue bringing us closer to the mysteries that exist between the first two films. Additionally, there have of course been canonical supplements to the franchise, such as the 2014 novel Alien Out of the Shadows, or even Alien Romulus, where in both stories Ripley's 57-year drift through space was interfered with, may offer further insight into the possible capture of Ripley's lifeboat, the Narcissus, or even additional investigation on the company's part, which would be interesting to learn about. The teaser displayed an interesting amalgamation of aesthetics that feels like it's drawn from multiple films. Alien Isolation kept Sevastopol Station pretty rigid in its stylistic identity. It was a visual love letter in the best way possible to 1979's Alien, and the great work of Ron Cobb, Chris Foss and Jean Giraud. Here we were exposed to the exact same interior originally created for the film, providing a functional, believable environment aboard a working industrial vessel. Therefore, it is very much a continuation of the original game. Then, upon first watching the teaser, and to my great surprise, the exterior door opens onto a flurry of visual and auditory stimuli, depicting what we now know is Kurosaki Station. I'm instantly reminded of David Fincher, as his most recognisable visual motive is rain. Whether it be Seven, Zodiac or Alien 3, it's a wonderful element for enhancing mood and atmosphere, making environments feel tangible. It was a reoccurring element in both Aliens and Alien 3, adding so much more depth and psychological oppression to those locations, as if these new worlds were trying to slowly wash the intruders away. We don't see enough of the exterior, but I'd say it's a pleasing mixture of both Aliens and Alien 3, in a very brief but powerful piece of imagery that, as a huge Alien fan, speaks to me 1,000 words. Any signs of deterioration both inside and out are very subtle, but everything looks fresh enough and the site appears to have power, making this feel incredibly recent, suggesting we will play through the beginnings of this colony's downfall. I'm wondering how much time we will spend in space, but none of that is the focus in the trailer. Therefore, my mind, and probably yours, are now spinning with a million questions as to the potential significance of this particular planetoid, other than mining. Hadley's Hope on LV-426 was located somewhere between 30 and 100 kilometers from the derelict, which contained the franchise's greatest enigma, the space jockey. Therefore, what relevance does this location vector have, and what secrets will it reveal to us, if any? This really is the perfect tease in that sense, and I'm starting to feel the anticipation growing. I'm excited to find out if they will explore any existential mysteries beyond the xenomorph itself. I am happy to see that the team at Creative Assembly have had the creative freedom to explore a whole new location, which allows them to weave additional canonical narratives into the timeline without contradicting the existing canon, which can become an issue when revisiting familiar locations such as Fiorina 161 or LV-426, if that makes sense. Alien Isolation was set in 2137, which was 15 years after the events of Alien, and 20 years before the Hadley's Hope colony was established. I'd assume the story will pick up very shortly after Amanda's escape from Sevastopol Station, perhaps days, weeks or months to allow the narrative to flow. Interestingly, Alien Romulus happened in 2142, 20 years after the Nostromo's detonation, but only 5 years after the first Alien Isolation. This sort of places Isolation 2 and Romulus within the same time frame, more or less. Could there be connective tissue? Personally, I imagine it'll be a reference here or there at best and nothing more, if anything. I know that Fede Alvarez had his Romulus script already established many years ago, before he approached Ridley Scott. I'd also have to assume that the good folks at Creative Assembly have likely been harbouring their own meaty narrative for a sequel to their award-winning game, which came out a whopping 12 years ago. That said, Renaissance Station was likely operational during the events of Isolation. Just some food for thought. Please share your thoughts in the comments because I'd love to hear different opinions on this. For me, I simply cannot wait to get stuck into this new adventure, which so far is demonstrating exactly the right dark tone and atmosphere of the first game, but on a much larger scale, and with real weight to the narration that could be very consequential. It's also one of those titles you don't mind waiting for because you know it'll be worth it come release day. Take care guys, and thank you for watching.